So thanks again for joining us. We are in a brave new world here in supportive housing in New York. For many decades, we had the New York agreements that kind of had a logic to them and made supportive housing make sense. And now we are in a post-New York world, and we have great unprecedented commitments from both the state and the city, and it can be really hard to keep everything straight. So we're here today just to learn about NYC 1515 and dig a little bit deeper into that program. That is the city's commitment to create 15,000 units over the next 15 years. The plan includes newly constructed residences as well as scattered site apartments, and it is well underway. So we're very lucky to have 3 people at all of the relevant city agencies who are charged with making it all happen. They're going to start off with a short presentation, followed by some questions from me, and then we'll have ample time for Q&A from the audience. But before we begin, before I introduce our panelists and begin the presentation, are there any really burning questions that people have? Like you came into the room today and said, if I don't find this out, I'm going to leave here very disappointed. None. You know everything about NYC 1515. Okay. All right, we'll cover a lot. I promise you'll be happy. So our esteemed panelists are, I'll start from my left, Kristin Misner-Gutierrez, Deputy Commissioner for Supportive and Affordable Housing and Services at the NYC Human Resources Administration, HRA. We have Emily Lehman, Assistant Commissioner at the Division of Special Needs Housing at the NYC Department of Housing Preservation and Development, HPD, and Gail Wolsk, Senior Director at the Office of Housing Services, NYC Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, DOH-MH. Is that enough acronyms? Yes. Okay. So I'm going to kick it off to Kristin to start our presentation.
Great, thank you. I would like to thank the network and Rebecca and everyone who put on this conference for your continued great partnership. We really appreciate the opportunity to be here and just for all the work that you do to help with supportive housing throughout the year. So maybe we'll give you guys a quick little round of applause. Okay, so I know it's after lunch, and some of you had a great lunch. You may be thinking I could hide in the back, maybe take a little nap. So our first goal of this presentation is to not bore you. We did a very diligent job of collecting some candy before we came in. So if we see some of you snoozing, we may gently toss you a piece of candy to help wake you up. If it accidentally hits you, it will, also help wake you up, but I apologize for that in advance. So that's our first goal, and that's how we're going to make sure we don't bore you. Our second goal is to really do such a great job of explaining the program to you that you all leave here really excited and geared up to just go apply. Even if you're not a nonprofit, if you're a consultant, we want you to walk out of here and say, I want to apply for 1515. If you're an advocate, you also should want to apply. And in that vein, I just want to get a sense of actually who is in the room. And this is also to kind of make sure everyone's awake. Anyone who's a not-for-profit, could you just stand up?
Stand up.
Oh, lots of not-for-profits. All right. All right, you can sit down. What about anybody who is an advocate? Great. What about any developers? Ooh, some developer. All right, great.
You can be a nonprofit and a developer. Yes,
What about consultants? Any consultants? All right. I also want to ask, because part of what we want to do is we want to just be very real and very transparent. We want you to know who the team is that's working on 1515. It really is not just us up on the panel, but for those of you in the audience, so my team, Emily's team, Gail's team, anyone here who works on 1515 with us, stand up. All right, we're gonna give this team a round of applause because look at these guys. I mean, these are the people that are reading your applications. These are the people that are trying to figure out how to make these deals work. These are the people that are up at night worrying about how we're gonna get the next deal done or how the closings are gonna happen. So we're very excited to be here, and what we'll do is we're gonna go through some of the questions that we've heard with the hope that we can explain how this program is working and some of the lessons that we've learned along the way. And then we want to leave a lot of time also for you guys to just ask what's on your mind and what you want to know. So the first thing we want to do is just go through who does what. So the three agencies up here are kind of the key agencies that are rolling out 1515. We have been very thoughtful and very deliberate to create ways and mechanisms for us to work together. And I think what you'll probably find as we talk as well is that we work really great together, and we also have good tension, right? So we disagree with each other, we push back on each other, we fight with each other. And I think at the end of the day, it really produces a better product for everybody. So I work at HRA. HRA does some of the overall 1515 coordination. So this is related to the Mayor's Supportive Housing Task Force. There were 23 recommendations that came out of that. We've been working on implementing that, overseeing some of the big picture work. We also issue the RFPs. We kind of do the procurement, all the wonderful addendums that are come out. You'll see they'll be coming from HRA. We have a team, the Caste team at HRA, that does eligibility. So when you submit your 2010Es, they're the ones that are looking at it, determining whether or not clients are eligible for supportive housing. And we also do referrals. And so when people are ready to move into supportive housing, we also control that part of it. And so the way I like to think about it is kind of HRA does the front end work. And so it helps to secure the services, get the clients eligible, get them teed up and move them in. And then we do a handoff to DOHMH, and they'll walk through kind of their piece of it, and HPD.
So I, at HPD, we provide the financing, so the capital that you need to build your buildings. We provide that in partnership with our sister agencies, so HDC in the city, HFA, HCR at the state, HHAP at the state as well. We also provide tax exemptions, and then HPD also provides project-based rental assistance for 1515. And this is really, really exciting because this is the first time the city has funded a project-based rental assistance program, I think ever, but certainly for supportive housing.
So at DOHMH, we support the not-for-profits throughout the process of serving your residents through their lifetime, through your lifetime. So our goal is we start working with HRA and HPD as soon as the projects are awarded. We provide technical assistance through the development of the contract, and once you are in your contracting process, you're going to have a contract with DOHMH. So we're going to provide the monitoring of the social services. For scattered site, it's social services and operations. So on Congregate, you may have an award from HPD for the rental assistance, and you're going to have an award from DOHMH for the services. In scattered site, DOHMH is providing the contracting for both the services and the operations. And we're also providing, the most important, is the technical assistance about serving your residents. And so we're going to talk further about this. Is the collaboration, as Kristin said, is the most important. Since 1515 started last year, we have maybe almost daily for the last year and a half. With HPD and HRA, we have a great close collaboration, and that's what's making this so successful.
Okay, so we're not going to kind of build up. We're just going to go right to, like, what do you want to know? How are we doing? How is this program doing? We have made over 2,000 awards to date, which we're very excited about. 625 of those awards are for scattered site units, 1,448 are for congregate units. Out of those congregate awards, 460 have closed on financing with HPD as of December. We know there's a whole chunk of you that are about to close right now, and so we're very excited about that. And then in addition, the 1515 is kind of one funding stream, right? This is like one of the solutions to homelessness, but there's a lot of others also. And so there's another 3,000 supportive units that aren't part of 1515 that HPD has also closed on. And there's a lot of other pipelines around a lot of other housing resources. And so we're excited that this is kind of moving into the next phase of supportive housing, but we also still have a tremendous amount of supportive housing that's being built simultaneously, and a lot of move-outs that are happening into those units. This is just a quick little reminder about the timeline and how we got to where we are. November 2015 was when Mayor de Blasio announced the plan to create 15,000 units. January was when we created a task force, and December was when the task force report came out. This is just a little timeline, so as you guys reflect back, and I know you all have been working very hard to get these developments up and running or to go out and find apartments. We too have been working very hard, and so some of the key milestones that we've accomplished, if you look kind of that first dot is when the mayor made the announcement. The commission, the task force was commissioned in 2016, and this was a very deliberate attempt to really understand what we did great with New York 3, what we could improve upon, what we wanted to learn from. And so we had over 30 meetings. I mean, it was a really great opportunity to get feedback from all of you in the field as to how to build and roll out this program. And as we were building it and as the work groups were convening and discussing, we also were able to issue an RFP in August, right? Because we didn't want to wait for the report to finish in order to start getting some of these units up and running. So we issued our first scatter site RFP in August. The task force published their report in December. We made our first awards the end of December 2017. Then the Congregate RFP was released in February 2017, so that's about a year and a half ago. So our open-ended Congregate RFP was released about a year and a half ago. The scatter site open-ended RFP was released in June, so about a year ago. Our first scatter site contracts began in July 1st of 2017. HPD, as they mentioned, we issued the first city-funded rental subsidy for supportive housing, and so that application process was rolled out in September. And so, and then we reconvened the task force in February 2018, and we, gave a report out. We let everyone know how we're doing. We gave them some feedback. We heard feedback from them. And so in what I would say is not a tremendously long amount of time, as you just heard, we've made over 2,000 awards. The pipeline is moving. Lots of people are applying. We're really excited, and we want to keep this moving. And we want to make sure that we make this as easy, as transparent, as coordinated as possible. And the team that you saw and everyone that stood up is really dedicated towards doing that. So what's in these RFPs? The support services. So this is something that we heard from the task force that was really important, right? There was this big concern that rent was eating away at service dollars. And so everybody said to us, you have to separate them out. You have to have rent on one line and services on the other so that we aren't constantly taking away from our services to pay for the rent. And so we listened, and we really took that to heart, and we fought to get really rich budgets to fund the services for supportive housing. So as you'll see on the scatter site, we have $10,000 just for services, and we have a rental subsidy separate from that. For Congregate, we have $17,500 just for services. Also from the Supportive Housing Task Force was this interest in really expanding upon the families with children model. We want to serve children in the families. We want to be more thoughtful about how we're rolling this out. So on the scatter site, it's $19,200 just for services. And on the Congregate side, $28,738 just for services. You could see young adult singles, over 20,000. On the Congregate side, over 25,000. And young adults on the scatter site, we are actually going to issue an RFP this week. So be on the lookout if you want to do scatter site supportive housing for young adults. There's going to be an opportunity coming out this week, and you'll see the rates in there. And if you want to do for Congregate, it's over 28,000. So we worked really hard in conjunction with you guys to think about what are models that are really going to be effective in serving these hard-to-serve populations, and how do we make sure that we bring the funding levels up to the needed amount. We hope that this is really enough. We've heard from a lot of you that are doing this, the excitement and the ability to hire additional staff to really make these models work. So we hope you guys look at this. We think it's very competitive. We think it's some of the most exciting competitive rates out there. And we hope that it's going to help people deliver the model that we're all hoping for. The other key thing that we've been trying to do is have a very flexible model where we hear back from you guys what you want to know about, right? And so one thing we heard is that the city actually doesn't have one coordinated spot to go to find out information about supportive housing. You have to go to different websites, you have to go to different agencies. Shinny does, the network does a great job of consolidating a lot of the information around for the whole entire state, but for New York City specifically, we actually launched a webpage. So anyone who's looking to move into supportive housing, who's a nonprofit looking to develop supportive housing, a developer wanting to build supportive housing, any of you guys can go to this one website, and we've pulled information from HPD's websites, from DOHMH's websites, from any of the relevant websites, so that you have one landing page to go to. We're very excited. You can go to it now. It is up and running for the past couple months, and we're hoping that it's a way to really provide some insight and transparency into how to take a very complicated process and maybe make it a little less complicated. If you go, it's at www.nyc.gov/HRA, and then you'll see, if you go down this side panel here, you'll see just a link on the left that says supportive housing. And so you just click on supportive housing. So hopefully it's not too hard to find.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about the development process and HPD's role. So as Kristin said earlier, since the start of Housing New York, which started in January 2014, HPD has financed over 3,000 units of supportive housing, which is really great. And one of the ways we have done that is by expanding the opportunities for developing and preserving supportive housing across HPD. So traditionally, the way we've funded supportive housing at HPD has been through the Supportive Housing Loan Program. That is still the primary way we're funding supportive housing. That loan program is both a new construction and a preservation program. It requires that at least 60% of the units be set aside for supportive housing. And the other 40% are really up to you to decide what makes sense for the project. So we've had projects where the other 40% are set aside for seniors. We've seen set aside for families, set aside for a range of affordability levels. It's really up to you to decide what makes sense for your project and your site. But in addition to the supportive housing loan program, HPD revamped many of our term sheets, and we now have homeless set-asides in almost all of them. And you can elect for your homeless set-aside to be supportive housing. So if you are doing a new construction project, and you're looking at our ELA program, which is our new construction multifamily program, that program has a 10 to 30% homeless set-aside. You can elect to have your homeless set-aside be supportive housing and apply for 1515 for services and rental assistance. We also have the Sera Program, which is our loan program specifically for seniors. That has a 30% homeless set-aside. And again, you can elect to do supportive housing for seniors. Mix and Match is another one of our new construction programs that's targeted more towards low income and middle moderate income. That has a 10% homeless set aside. Again, you can apply for supportive. And then we have a range of preservation loan programs. These will primarily be for buildings that are already supportive housing that need rehab or extended affordability or an extended tax exemption. The Year 15 program is a program that any project that has tax credits will have to go through when you're exiting your compliance period. But if you don't have tax credits and you're a supportive housing building and you need a little refresh, your building needs some capital needs, you can come in through the supportive housing loan program, or we have other programs within our preservation division. So that's on the capital side, and as I said before, HPD will typically provide the capital loan, and then we will either provide tax credits or we'll partner with one of our sister agencies who will provide the tax credits and tax-exempt bonds.
I'm just going to break in here to say I'm thrilled that there's so many people that have come in. There are actually 9 seats up in front. So unless you're planning to sneak out, which you may be, and that's fine, but otherwise, if you want a seat, come on down, take a seat. Okay, you're all going to sneak out? Okay.
Okay, so next I'm going to talk about the rental assistance, which is something that we are really, really excited about. So as I said before, this is the first time the city has made a commitment to provide a project-based rental assistance for affordable housing in New York City. This rental assistance is exclusively available to projects that have a 1515 service award. So to be eligible for this, it's pretty simple. You just need to have your preliminary service award from HRA. And then HPD has a very short and simple application on our website to apply for the rental assistance. We have modeled this rental assistance to look and act as much like a project-based Section 8 contract as possible, which is something many in the room are probably very familiar with. And just like we did with the rest of 1515, we really took a lot of time and care to get feedback from the supportive housing community to make sure we were shaping this program in a way that worked for everybody. So, using a project-based Section 8 contract as our base, we have an initial contract term of 15 years that is renewable. HPD will be administering the rental assistance just like we do with Section 8. So for those of you that have Section 8 contracts, you're probably very used to working with HPD's Division of Tenant Resources. You would also work with that division in administering your 1515 rental assistance contract. The rental assistance rates are tied to the FMR. So 1515 is a really very well-funded program. You have your rental assistance tied to the FMR, which you can then use to leverage debt and make sure your building has positive cash flow for the long term. And then on top of that, you have the service dollars that Kristin talked about. So you have the FMR on your rental assistance, and then on the services side, you have anywhere from $17,500 to almost $29,000 annually for services. In keeping this program modeled as much like Section 8 as possible, prior to closing, you will enter into something that looks like an AHAP with HPD. We're calling it an agreement to enter into a rental assistance contract. And then once the building has completed, you will enter into something very similar to a HAP contract, which we are just calling a rental assistance contract. So that is the rental assistance, and I'm happy to answer more questions as we go if there are. And then the last thing I just wanted to talk about is our congregate development process. So just to make sure everybody understands what the process is, kind of the order of operations that we would recommend you going in to make sure you're able to get your building built as quickly and as seamlessly as possible. So the first thing you want to do is find a site. We are seeing providers and developers do this in a variety of ways. Some nonprofits are finding sites on their own. Some nonprofits are partnering with joint ventures, or joint venturing with a church or a private developer that may have resources available to access sites. And we're also seeing providers apply to HPD's RFPs. So we have many RFPs that we're putting out, sometimes multiple in a month. You are certainly welcome to apply and pitch supportive housing as part of that application. So we would really encourage that. So once you have your site, then the next thing you're going to want to do is apply for your service funding. You would apply to HRA for your preliminary award. The RFP is open and accepting applications on a rolling basis. So really, as soon as you have your site and you kind of have an idea of how many units you can fit on that, you should feel free to apply. Around the same time, you also want to reach out to HPD to talk to us preliminarily about what you're thinking. We can give you some feedback on the program you're proposing and how much you think it might cost. And then while your service application is being reviewed, HPD will continue to work with you to put together your project. Once you receive your service award from HRA, then you'll want to apply to HPD for your rental assistance. Again, that's a very, very simple application that's on our website. And then once you have your capital in place, your rental assistance, and your services, and some other due diligence items that HPD requires, then we're ready to close. So as I said before, at construction closing, we'll sign loan documents, we'll sign a regulatory agreement, and we'll sign something that looks very similar to an AHAP. When you're in construction, about 12 months before you're expecting your TCO, you'll want to reach out to DOHMH to start the contract registration process. That seems like a lot of time, but we really find that it is critical that we start working on that early so that you can make sure you have your contract registered by the day your building opens, so you can start drawing down on that contract immediately. And then once the project receives a TCO, HPD will come out and do an HQS inspection like we do with a Section 8 contract. And once you pass HQS, then you sign your HAP-like contract, and you can start moving tenants in. And so that is a basic summary of the congregate development process.
So I want to jump on a little what Emily just said. Once you start your contracting, it's going to be with DOHMH and HRA together, and it will be registered with DOHMH. And that's when the exciting stuff comes as you continue the life of the project from my point of view. Oh. Thank you. So we've got off to an amazingly quick start here. And as I was thinking about this presentation yesterday, I took a look at the last time New York City did scattered site housing, and that was under New York 3. So there were populations in New York 3, in which an RFP went out in 2007. At that time, it took about a year and 3 months from the award to projects opening, most opening later. Here, in 1515, we were able to, from getting the award to opening up the first 11 programs at once in FY18, approximately 3 months. There were programs that opened up in July 2018, and that was about 2 months after an award. So we've really jumped very quickly. 11 scattered site programs. There are 3 more scheduled to open in FY19. We even have 1 congregate that's opening any moment now. So we'll open within FY18. Yes. Can we throw the candy?
Yeah.
Right? So 11.
I did play softball.
Right? This is the first time I think that we've been able to get all the systems in place to be able to not only get the contracting and award so quickly, but the services up. And that's, in the end, it's all about getting people in the houses and helping people maintain their housing, live healthy, recovered lives. That's really what the services are focused on. That's where we want everything to go. So as Kristin talked about the rates, there's a lot of questions. These are higher rates. These are higher rates, first off, because we've heard so much from the community after all these years that the old rates don't meet the current costs of scattered site or congregate housing. So these rates are a real attempt to meet those costs from what we've heard. They're also meant to have really enhanced services. So we've heard from the community, as Kristin said, that services have gone down. You may have opened a program 15 years ago at a 1 to 15 case manager to resident caseload, and now you're at 1 to 25, or maybe 1 to 30. With the service funding being discrete here, you will always be able to afford to have a 1 to 15 caseload. And we do have different populations. So in a family population, it was always meant to be that the provider is serving the whole family. But the funding wasn't always there to ensure that if the family had 3 children and 2 adults, and maybe the second significant other changed over years and had new needs, that causes a lot of services. Here, that funding is there. Also within that funding, in a congregate, the front desk staff, your what some programs call security, what some programs call front desk staff, that is covered within your service dollars, because those are the first people that your residents see. Those staff are persons who need to be able to serve the resident, not primarily as a security, but also in terms of maintaining your building's environment and your building's security. So that's also part of the funding here for 24/7 staffing. So those are some of the reasons. But the biggest reason why these rates are higher is that there's an expectation that this is more intensive services. So within 1515, what you'll find in your contracts is that supervision is standardized. So supervisory staff have to have a master's level degree. You must supervise your staff once a week. That is in your scope of service. That's a major difference. It's very easy to get very busy and not to find the time to supervise your staff till once every 3 weeks. This is part of the standards that are 1515. So that while you're thinking about all these evidence-based practices, motivational interview, trauma-informed care, person-centered planning, you're able to give your staff the time and the training and the supervision to be able to implement those well. That's what's most important. And the other, I think, major piece here is we know people are building lives. And we know that the service need changes over time. When you have 15 residents, 15 families moving in at once, those first 6 months are going to have a higher level of service need. You are taking people around, introducing them to the community, finding out what their needs are. Maybe 3 years later, there are times when there's much less of a service need. And maybe those people are ready to start looking at the next level of housing more independent. And so the goal is here is that all programs are assessing consistently whether supportive housing continues to be the need and looks for whatever, and we know it's hard to find the next step. We know it's not affordable before somebody throws candy at me. Right? There's a reality there, but that doesn't mean that we don't want to try to creatively think about ways to keep this pipeline going while we're building and building, but also move people forward to the next step so that they can utilize the services in the community. That's what you're going towards in supportive housing, to utilize the service in the community and be more independent. And looking at, and as we go through this, what we want to hear from you is what are ways to do that, to work with DOHMH on how are service models, how do we help move people forward? How do we look at this service differently?
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
What is the oversight going to look like as far as, how do you monitor the program?
So there's a set of, do you want to say?
Did everyone
questions
hear
to
the
end?
question?
How does the
I can repeat it back. How does the oversight work? And let's answer that because I think it's relevant here, but then we'll save the rest of the questions for the Q&A.
So there's a set of standards that every New York 15 program will get from DOHMH. There's an audit at minimum every 3 years, depending on the number of program your agency has, but every year. Also, there's a program specialist is assigned to your program, and they will be at minimum on site twice a year to assess what's going on, to monitor the services. And there's an evaluation. There's also a CPA evaluation. And that goes right into where we're going to be evaluating. So working from New York 3, we're going to build upon the New York, oh, thank you. We're going to build upon the New York 3 evaluation. So we are going to continue, DOHMH is going to continue to do a cost analysis evaluation, but in partnership with City, with CIDI, with ACS, with HPD, with HRA, DSS, we're going to be evaluating many more domains and be looking at the service structure and what services are most beneficial to the residents and specifically to each population. So we're going to be looking at the health and wellness. So does each of your residents have a primary care physician? And if they have a primary care physician, are residents then getting appropriate evaluation and preventive care? So what we've found in New York 3 is that supportive housing residents, unfortunately, are not having longer mortality. So people are getting into housing, but they're not living longer than other people at similar income levels. And is that something we can improve? That's something that supportive housing, can we help people live longer, healthier lives? How do we do that? We're going to look at information. People with mental illness smoke at much higher rates, are much more addicted. How do we help people stop smoking? How do you have smoke-free buildings? How do you have smoke-free scattered site? Right? How do you manage that? How do you monitor that? Those are some of the things we're going to be evaluating and looking at. We're also going to look at what are the activities that really promote wellness and recovery. And within children and families, so we mentioned you're going to serve the whole family. You know that when somebody comes into your housing, some people have people in your housing who've been there 10, 20 years, maybe longer. They develop families. Families change. Are children's educational needs being met? Are the children's physical and mental health needs being met? How do we increase that? How do we help young adults growing up within families in supportive housing, young adults who are housed independently, who are 18 to 26? How do we ensure that they are gaining the skills to learn to live independently? And as Kristin mentioned, we're going to have an RFP coming out next week for young adult scattered site. So how do we ensure that those young adults are not only learning the skills to live independently, but learning the skills to be a good parent, and doing that in one program in a scattered site? So what are the evidence-based practices that have to be in place to ensure that that happens? So
will you provide like resources to the providers
Yes, so technical assistance from DOHMH includes providing resources, helping access resources, helping gain information about what is out there nationwide, so yes. So. Thank you.
Okay.
Nope.
Great. That was a very thorough and helpful presentation, so thank you to the panelists. And I'm going to ask a few questions just to get us rolling here. My first question that I wanted to ask, I think was covered in the presentation because we talked about a lot of the big milestones that NYC 1515 has already reached. But I have one more milestone in mind I wanted Emily to speak to regarding the budget deal that was passed last night.
Sure. So late breaking news. We all found out late last night that the mayor and city council came to a handshake agreement on the budget for next fiscal year, which is good across the board, but it's especially great for us because it includes $100 million of accelerated funding for supportive housing. Which means that on the Congregate side, we're going to be able to build more supportive housing quicker. So we had originally been budgeted to do 500 units a year. We're now going to be budgeted to do 700 units a year, which is a 40% increase. So that's really great.
Excellent. Very good news.
But we need you guys all to apply for the service award and for the capital dollars to actually make this happen. So we can put the money there, but we really need you guys to help actually make it happen.
So that's a good segue to my next question, which is about the flow of applications. So have you seen that, over the year and a half that the RFP's been open, have you seen the flow of applications change? What's the turnaround time? And, how should providers be interfacing with your agency maybe before they put in an application? Like what does that process look like?
So if you wanted to apply for a New York 1515 Service Award, we're definitely seeing the flow picking up. We are very excited to have 2 open-ended RFPs on the street right now, but that's also, it's a challenge, right? Because we have to get, we have an interagency or a cross-agency committee that reviews the applications, and it's different committees for the scatter site than for the Congregate. And we know that it's not always been consistent, right? So the timing, it's not like it's a definite, it's going to take 2 months or it's going to take 12 months or whatever it is. But this is something that we're looking at and that we're really committed to. We want to make sure that things are moving as quickly as possible while at the same time giving all of your hard written applications the time that we need to really review them and make sure that all the critical information that Gail has mentioned is in there. So, a couple things that we're doing is, one, we're trying to do smaller batches. So rather than holding a bunch of applications until we have, 10 or 15, if we get them in, we're just trying to review them as quickly as possible. The last round that came in, we were actually able to review and award it within 8 weeks. Which is really fast. However, I do want to say that there's very real process steps that need to happen. And so you shouldn't be budgeting into your plan, this is going to be awarded within 8 weeks. You should do it as soon as possible. The award is good for 2 years, right? So if you even have like a glimmer of an idea of doing this, I would say put your application in. There's no harm to putting it in. And you also have to be prepared and maybe build in some time if your application does not get awarded, right? You may want to reapply. And so we're really open to providing feedback. We actually are going to have an info session on June 19th. And so for anyone who really wants to apply, whether you're a new provider who's never done this, or you're somebody that's been doing it but want to just continue to learn more, there's lots of intricacies about all the pieces that Gail had mentioned. And so we want to make sure that you guys know all those intricacies. So 2 p.m., June 19th, and an addendum went out on Friday about this info session at HRA, and we're just going to dig in, roll up our sleeves, and answer all of your nitty-gritty questions about, the budget says this, I put in this, how about that, all those pieces. We want to make this as really easy to understand as possible. So apply, we're moving quickly, but at the same time, we're really reviewing it, and as Gail said, we really want to bring up the quality, right? We want to make sure we believe that we're funding this at a level that can really deliver the best possible housing that's out there.
Great. That's all good news. So my next question is for all of you. What have been some of the biggest barriers so far to implementing this program? And then perhaps on top of that, what opportunities are still out there, possibly partnerships, new people that can come on board that can help us face some of these obstacles?
Okay, so the pink elephant in the room, the accessibility of finding scattered site apartments. As we started with scattered site, that is a major challenge. So, but we've done some things to try to meet that challenge. If you were at the presentation this morning, Commissioner Banks mentioned that for studios, we are at the FY18 FMR. There are landlord incentives. There are also, I say this with a little pause, but some programs have been able to help to utilize 2 bedrooms or even 3 bedrooms. I was quite surprised. I recently analyzed DOHMH's scattered site portfolio, and there are a few 3-bedroom roommate models. More than a handful, less than 50. That programs have been maintaining over years. So there are ways, and we want to learn more about how the people make roommate situations work. It's unfortunate that our population, who may have more needs than the general public, may not always have the opportunity to not have a roommate, but there are many people in the general public who don't have the opportunity not to have a roommate. So it's not different, and it's all about integrating and ensuring that no matter what somebody's needs are, they're able to have a dignified home. How do you do that? In the same way that anybody else in the community should have a dignified home within what's a hard. It's hard living at the minimal income our residents live at. It's hard running a program at what we have.
And just to piggyback off what Gail said, I mean, I think the biggest challenge for us is, you know, we spent a tremendous amount of time internally and with all of you guys in the community thinking through this program, and we, you know, rolled up our sleeves, did our best effort, thought through like 100 different possible scenarios, tried to address them all. We funded these really richly, and then 2017, the FMR goes up 10%, right? Something that we did not anticipate. I think if the FMR had not gone up by 10%, we wouldn't be having as much a challenge as we are in trying to locate apartments. We built in a 2% rent escalator, right? Because we thought, because historically the FMR had gone up 2%, and so we're like, oh, this is great, we're gonna keep pace with it, right? So we really put thought into it. But to Gail's point also, I think one thing we wanna make sure that everyone hears is that we are flexible. We want this program to work. We see ourselves as your partner in making this happen. And so when this, you know, kind of thing happened with FMR increasing and providers coming to us and saying we're having a really hard time with this, we went back and said, all right, how, you know, what can we do? Like, how can we fix this? We recognize that this is a challenge. And so we were able to really push and fight and get the fiscal year 18 FMR for studios, right? So now anyone that's going out there trying to find a studio in the Scatter Site program has this 10% increased rent, which is, I think, really great. We also have a unit incentive, right? So we're helping to enable nonprofits to have a little bit more leverage to try to get longer leases, and to try to have a little bit more flexible funding to try to, you know, push them over the edge in trying to find these apartments. We're also working internally with our landlord team. We have an outreach team that goes out and works with landlords to secure units, so we're trying to partner with the providers to try to help them find units. So, you know, I think you know, we want to be responsive. We want this program to be successful, and we really want to be seen as your partners in this. And, you know, us three and the people you saw stand up, I mean, these are the people. Like, come to us, talk to us. Like, we're the faces. We're doing this every single day. So if you have a problem, if you have a challenge, if you have concerns, just call us. Like, email us. Like, we're really available and responsive.
Yeah. And then I'll just say on the HPD side, I think the biggest barriers we're seeing in supportive housing are the same barriers we're seeing across all affordable housing development at HPD. So land is a really scarce resource in New York City, and it keeps getting more expensive. So finding sites for any type of affordable housing is a challenge. We also have limited scarce resources on the capital side. So because of changes at the federal level to the corporate tax rate, we're getting lower raises than we used to on LIHTC. We also have a limited pool of volume cap. That said, The city is really prioritizing supportive housing for many of our scarce resources. So I would not let that prohibit you from reaching out to us and looking for new sites, because we really do want to continue to do as much supportive housing as we possibly can. And we'll work with you to figure out what resources we have available to make your deals work. In terms of opportunities that we're seeing that I just want to make sure folks are aware of in the room. So again, land is a scarce resource, so folks should definitely be looking at our RFPs that we're putting out. You should be encouraged to apply on your own or partner with a larger development team and propose a supportive housing building as part of that RFP. We've had really great successes with RFPs where we have one supportive housing building and an Ella and a Sera and a whole mix, and it's really great to see that diversity of housing types on our city-owned sites. Another tool for if there's any zoning nerds in the room, just some zoning tricks that you can use to leverage as much affordable housing on your sites as possible. So with supportive housing, a lot of us will often file our buildings as Use Group 3, nonprofit institution with sleeping accommodations. When ZQA was passed a couple of years ago, there was an opportunity that was unlocked to allow more buildings to access the full community facility FAR by layering Use Group 2, 3, and 4 in the same building. Happy to explain that more after if there are any zoning nerds in the room. And then the other zoning trick is if you're interested in doing a combination of supportive and senior housing in the same building, you could look to file your non-supportive units as heirs, which would allow you to unlock that larger FAR in your building. So those are two tricks for getting more bang for your buck on your land.
Okay, great, thank you. So my next question is really, we all know that the affordable housing needs of our city are great, and there are many neighborhoods and many different communities and populations that are really struggling to find affordable housing. So in that context, what does an integrated supportive housing residence look like that fills and fulfills multiple needs?
So from my point of view, it is a building in which when you walk in, you do not know that there are people who receive services or people who don't receive services, that there is no identification, and in fact that everybody in that building clearly knows that there is a service provider there that everybody has access to get information. Whether some people get more intensive services or not is not something that is a building environment issue. So an integrated apartment building is a building that is independent housing. There's an apartment building, just like the one next door, that does not serve people who may have some special needs or are coming from homelessness. I see a question, but I think we're going to wait at the end to all questions.
Yeah, let's hold the questions. Thanks. I'll make sure we have time.
And then I'll say, in terms of an integrated model, so we have the supportive set aside in a building, which is dictated by the service award you are applying for. So whether you're applying to serve single adults or families with children or young adults, that is prescribed to an extent in your service award. But then the other units in your building are really, as I said before, what you think is appropriate for the neighborhood and for your mission and what you want. So integrating supportive housing with seniors, with families, with low incomes, middle incomes, kind of whatever you are interested in is a permutation that can work.
I think one thing that we're just seeing is creativity, right? Like we really value and place a premium on everyone's ability to think creatively and outside the box because it's getting harder and harder to find land. And so we've been really impressed. Like some of the providers have come to us with really interesting solutions, and we've been doing everything we can to provide the flexibility to make those creative solutions work. So.
And I'll just add, right, integrated is the people that are living in your building, but it's also the non-residential spaces in your building. So maybe your community really needs a daycare, and so you're including a daycare on your ground floor. They really need some retail. So you're really building your whole building to be integrated and meet the needs of the community.
Mm-hmm. Okay, excellent. I just want to check, can everybody hear in the back? Yes, you're nodding. Okay, good. So, Kristin, you mentioned in your presentation that we have multiple supportive housing programs. So we're closing out New York 3, that's coming to an end, and we also have the state launching their eShy program. So I'm curious, from all the panelists, in your view, what are the pros and cons of having these multiple programs happening in parallel?
I think the biggest pro is that we all want housing for homeless individuals in need, right? And so the more programs, the more funding, the more opportunities there are to house people and provide them with a home, the better. The hard part is that we worry that it may be confusing for the providers and for the community to really understand the differences among the programs. We don't think it should be you shouldn't need a doctorate to understand like what program to apply for in order to build supportive housing. And so I think there may be some confusion and people don't really understand like what is the best program for me. And so we're just trying as much as possible to do as many information sessions and to be as available as possible so people can understand it. So I think that's probably the biggest con.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it goes to the question before, integration. It's good to have people with different family types, different needs, different income levels in one building, to develop a community where people can learn about others' strengths and learn about others' needs and be able to support each other. So we believe that the more integrated, be it integration in programs, integration with different income needs, the more successful the building can be.
Yeah. And just to echo what Kristin said earlier, we do recognize that this is a brave new world with maybe too many options for funding, and it is a little confusing about when to apply for what and how to put together the right mix for your building. And we are very proactively working with each other and with our state partners to really try and streamline things and make it as easy for you as possible. And we really appreciate your patience in working with us as we've been figuring this out.
Okay, great. So I want to move on and talk a little bit about the populations that are being served by NYC 1515, because it marks a little bit of a change from what we saw with New York 3. So I'm wondering, maybe, Kristin, you can start us off. What is the thinking behind targeting these specific populations, and why the focus on the chronically homeless?
So we actually had, as part of our year-long task force, we had a group solely dedicated on thinking about data and targeting and where there's need. And so I think there was kind of two main interests. One was we wanted to make sure that supportive housing was going towards the but-for category. So people who otherwise would not be able to be in housing, right? So but-for supportive housing, they would be remaining in shelter indefinitely. And so there's a lot of conversation about how do we identify that population and how do we really make sure that this resource is targeted towards them first. And ideally, we would have enough that we could even serve other people who may have other venues out of shelter, but for this core group that really would not get out otherwise. And so there was two benefits working towards the chronically homeless. First, the chronically homeless, it is a good predictor of the people that are in shelter the longest and who are likely to need the most support. And secondly, a lot of the federal funding that was coming from HUD and others required that you had to be chronically homeless. And we got feedback from a lot of providers that it was very confusing when they had buildings that had some HUD dollars in it, some New York 3 dollars in it, or some other dollars in it, that they weren't sure who are they supposed to be targeting, what criteria trumps. And so again, our guiding principle here was simplicity. We wanted to make this very easy, very understandable, not confusing. As we all know, there's 58,000 people in shelter. There's a tremendous amount of need, right? And there's not a tremendous amount of resources always. And so we did an analysis, and we really dug into who are the people living in shelter, and broken out by population, what is the percentage of that population that will need supportive housing. And so CIDI did a lot of I think they looked at medical records and kind of frequent uses of hospitals to kind of create proxies around who are people that are who need the shelter, that need the supportive housing. And so with that, we were really able to come up with what we think was a good compromise, where instead of breaking it into like 18 separate categories, right? Because when you get too specific, that also gets really complicated. And we said, providers told us that, people that have SMI, many of them have SUD, co-occurring. The way you treat it is very similar. Separating out just makes it harder for an individual who may be caught in between those populations to know where they're supposed to go. So we just said, okay, we're going to do SMI, SUD, just one big broad population. And then amongst that, we looked at the need for, single adults versus families with children versus young adults. And what we added this time, based on all of your feedback, was young adult families. Because there was this acknowledgement that there are young adults who, maybe 20 years old that are having children themselves, and their needs may actually be a little bit different than, a mom who's maybe in her 30s that's, having a child. So that's the way we broke it up. We put a lot of thought into it, and what's great is through Caste and the 2010 PAC system, we have like a really great referral program, and we have a great referral team under Jen Kelly's unit that really helps put all these pieces together. And so we try to make something that could be very complicated, not complicated as much as possible. We know there's always outliers. We know there's still a lot of need, and we'd like to think about tackling those other populations and those other needs that may not be served directly by this. But we wanted to take, the first crack was trying to get at this hard-to-serve population.
Okay, I'm going to play acronym decoder and say SMI is serious mental illness. Most of you know this, but you may not all. And SUD is substance use disorder. CAS, customized
The customized assistance unit at HRA.
And the PACT system, I don't know what that stands for, but that's
oh yes, John, the placement and client tracking system. Oh, you get here, John. You can have a.
Kristin's the softball player, so she'll throw it. Oh, interception. Okay, so if you wanted to serve a subpopulation, say an individual family with HIV/AIDS or LGBTQ youth, would that qualify under 1515?
Yeah, if you read the RFP, there's an opportunity to apply for a subpopulation. You just have to make the argument as to why there's a need to serve this population. And so any facts or figures about knowing that there is, 15,000 LGBTQ youth in shelter right now, so clearly there's a need for housing for them, you'd put that in. And then we would just say, we do not want anyone to be in the situation where everything is so rigid that they're only serving this, this population, and then we run out of people in that population, right? So everything we've done is really to be really broad and flexible. And so we say, you can submit for a subpopulation. If we have that subpopulation, we will prioritize them, refer them to you first. But then if we run out of that population, you just have to be open to taking kind of the next population. And we try to, match it as similarly as possible because, we want these developments to succeed, right? We're going to be thoughtful about making sure that the services you're providing are the right mix for the clients that you're serving, right? We're not going to send you seniors necessarily to live in a building that's focused towards LGBTQ youth, unless they're veterans, in which case there could be some synergies there.
Great. So Emily, you mentioned, in a lot of HPD term sheets, we now have set-asides that are homeless set-asides that can be used layered with supportive housing. So I'm sure some developers are asking, how many units is the right number of units to reach an economy of scale for a supportive housing program? So maybe you and Gail could speak to that a bit.
Yeah, so if you're thinking of doing, let's say, an Ella or a mix and match that only has a 10% homeless set-aside, and you're interested in having that set-aside be supportive housing, I think you really want to think about that critically and talk with your service provider to get a good sense of how many supportive housing units they need in the building to make it economically viable from their perspective. So I think in the RFP, there's a case management ratio of 1 to 15. So that's a good rough rule of thumb of probably the minimum number of supportive units you want in your building. But of course, speaking to your service provider, they're really going to be the experts on how many units they need to make the program work in their building.
Mm-hmm. Right. And from a program point of view, 1 to 15 would be, you can have a program that's smaller, but it is hard to develop community. And it's especially with your staff. Having a building where you only have one staff there also makes it harder. So we would recommend thinking about if you're building large enough to at least have 30. Because what that, and I don't know the financial piece of that, whether that's economically more efficient, but I think from a program point of view, it's good to have two staff members who can work together, who can think together, who can help to develop that community. And that's most programs, when we model, we're modeling off of a program model of 30 persons.
So, but if you did have an Ella or a mix and match that had a homeless set aside that was smaller than that, but you really feel committed to including supportive housing in your building, you can always increase your homeless set aside, right? We'll never say
Good
no to
point.
more supportive units.
We at HRA are strong advocates of increasing the amount of supportive housing you'd like to do in any building. So we definitely encourage that. And, you know, we have some healthy disagreements sometimes about how much is too much. So we'd love your feedback. I mean, I would like to push the envelope, right? And I would like to make sure that we are providing as many units as possible. At the same time, you know, to Gail's point, you want to make sure that the building is an integrated building, right? It's really seen. So, you know, what is that percentage? I don't know. It's up for you.
60-40.
Or maybe 70-30, but it's up for you guys to really think about and propose to us.
Great, okay, thank you. So I wanted to touch quickly on the new rental assistance component of NYC 1515, which is very exciting. I know it's modeled after project-based Section 8. Emily, could you talk about what the response has been from the finance community?
Yeah, so, you know, as I said before, we did take a lot of time to meet with developers and folks in the finance community as we were developing the program to get their feedback. We'll be closing the first deals this June with the 1515 rental assistance. So folks right now are actively reviewing the final versions of the documents. I think, you know, one of the challenges that we've seen, which is not that different from what we saw when we were first starting to use project-based Section 8 in a lot of our buildings, is, you know, what would happen if the rental assistance were to go away? And that's a real understandable concern. So we've been working with lenders and syndicators to talk that through. Supportive housing projects typically have very rich reserves, richer than other programs. You know, we also have an initial contract term that's 15 years and fully expect that the contract will be renewed, so you'll have it for the full length of your loan. That is not something that the city is concerned about, but we understand this is a new program, so there are some concerns. So we are working with folks to talk through what they need to be comfortable on these deals, and also just trying to reaffirm as much as we can that this is a long-term program that's here to stay, and we are very committed to continuing to fund it.
Excellent. So I have many more questions, but I'm going to hold them because I know we have a lot of people in the audience that have questions they want to ask. So there is a mic in the middle there. If you're close to it, feel free to go up there and ask your question. Otherwise, try to project your voice as loud as you can, and I'll repeat it back so everyone can hear. So I know there was a question over here in this area. Yes.
So the goal is that your building looks like any apartment building. The goal is integration. So it's not about HIPAA, because that's about keeping information private. Hopefully your staff are not talking in elevators or in public places about any personal information, any medical information regarding your residents. But it really is about having a building that is an independent living building in which there are services on site, such as you might have an apartment building where there are doctor's offices on the first floor. Your supportive services shouldn't be any different. That people are not paying for them does not mean that they're any less, and doesn't mean that they should be set off any differently. So it really is about the integration piece.
So you're not looking to hide the fact that there's a supportive housing
No.
sign and to go to the doctor's office per se. You just, because the way you made it sound was like you shouldn't make it obvious that there's an office here.
No. What I meant to say is that it shouldn't be obvious to the residents of the building who is receiving services, who isn't. Outside the communities, what we would hope in integrated housing is the communities know that these are supportive housing and that the persons who live in these housings are no different and are independently housed just as the apartment building next door. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, right here.
When it comes to congregate housing versus the scattered site, will the admission criteria vary as far as level of functioning, or would the criteria be the same for both sets of clients because it's the 15-15?
I'm just going to repeat it back so everyone can hear. So the question is about eligibility criteria for the scattered site program versus the congregate program. Is there any difference or is it the same?
So that was actually one of the recommendations in the Taskforce report, right, was to start thinking about triaging, right, and who are the people that are most appropriate for scatter site, who are the people that are most appropriate for congregate, and then within that, a recommendation about being able to sort high need from middle need from low need. And so right now, there's a whole team in the Caste unit that reviews applications, and they're able to make an assessment about whether you're somebody who is appropriate just for scatter site, just for congregate, or for scatter site or congregate. And we also we take the providers and the shelter providers' opinion as well, right? So if the shelter provider says, listen, like I know this person, they will not do well in scatter site, they have to be in congregate, they'll review that and take that into consideration.
Yes.
Yeah, I want to pose a hypothetical partnership between a provider and a developer. Say you have a provider and a developer, and you are awarded a 15-15 RFP Congregate supportive housing award. You have, I just want to, because I'm not clear on it, you have set-asides. How are they chosen? Does HPD choose those? Or HRA choose the individuals that are placed in those units? Okay, so what about the rental assistance part? I'm kind of confused because if you have the set-asides, which HRA and HPD are going to provide, that already have are linked to subsidies, correct?
You're talking about project-based.
So, yeah, so you're asking if a homeless client that is referred to a unit, if they have a link voucher already, how does the 15-15 rental assistance come into play?
Yes,
Is that your question?
Yeah, it's a compound question. Now, that has nothing to do with the rental assistance program. So that means you're going to have other units in the building that receive rental assistance?
So there's a couple parts to that question, and I want to repeat it back because we're being recorded. I want to, for posterity, have the question. So you're talking about a developer and a provider partnership. Right. The first part of the question is set-aside. So is that determined by HPD, or does the partnership get to elect what kind of set-asides they are going to be using? That's the first part of your question? And the second part of the question is about rental assistance, and I think it's how do you deal with rental assistance that's attached to the client that's coming into the housing, and how does it work with maybe project-based rental assistance coming from HPD?
So maybe I'll try to tackle the first one, but tell me if I'm not answering your question. So when you have a development that is not supportive housing, just HPD, like an HPD affordable development that has a set aside for homeless clients, those projects require that you receive referrals, and there's a new referral process that actually is streamlined in my unit at HRA that will find the clients that are appropriate for those units, and we will make referrals. What Emily was talking about is that it's possible that you actually, instead of having that let's say it's 15 units of homeless set-aside, instead you could have them 15 units of supportive housing. And so in that case, what you would do is you would apply to the 15-15, and you would get the HPD rental subsidy and the 15-15 service award just for those 15 units. And in that instance, any of our New York City 15-15 service awards do have a very effective and efficient referral process that's streamlined through HRA.
Okay, great. Question over here.
How does it work with service awards and HPD RFPs? If you
So the question is, if you have a service award, if you don't have a service award, but you're applying to an HPD RFP and you want to do supportive housing, how does that work?
If you are thinking about applying for an RFP, I would definitely pose that as a question during the pre-submission conference to get an official answer. But my general recommendation would be that you want to make sure your partner is somebody that has a track record of receiving supportive housing service awards, so through New York 3 or 1515 or another service subsidy source. And you would want to describe that in your application, your success with receiving those awards.
Other questions? Yes.
Hi, I just wondered, for residents getting, so because it's like a project-based voucher, and in terms of thinking about looking down the line, if people are appropriate to move out of supportive housing and into affordable housing, will they be able to apply for like portable vouchers, like other project-based vouchers, or will it just be tied to that building?
So I'm going to repeat it back. Sorry, I know my panelists are so eager to answer your questions.
I
love it.
was gonna paraphrase.
Okay. You guys can do that too. But the question is, it's a project-based rental assistance with 1515. And if people are ultimately ready to move out of supportive housing, is there an option for that to become portable?
So there has been a lot of effort into thinking about this. I think it's called the moving on model, right? And it's how do you fund a rental subsidy to help somebody move out of supportive housing into permanent housing where they don't necessarily need services. And so I believe as part of the moving on model, there were portable Section 8 available. We're continuing to look at that to see if there are opportunities to expand that program or to see if there are other, with all of the city-funded rental subsidies, if there's opportunities to leverage some of those. It's something that we are committed to doing. We really think it's important that if, eventually people don't need the services, that they should be able to move on and we should free that up for somebody else. So I think it's something, if you have any great suggestions, we're happy to talk about it because it's something that we're continuing to look at.
Yes.
Fiscal year 18 scatter site contracts, startup costs are funded through accruals. Does that remain the same for this coming year?
Startup costs, I'm sorry, I didn't hear, we're funded through.
For scatter site contracts in fiscal year 18, the startup costs are funded through accruals, but you're holding back expenses. Does that remain the same?
So the question is, for the scatter site, startup costs are funded through accruals, and is that going to continue into the future?
So startup is a quarter of your budget, and it's correct that programs under 1515 that started prior to 3 months may have used some accruals, but we work with a provider to attempt to ensure that there's a 3-month startup program, there's a 3-month startup budget, and it depends really on when you're starting to move in the scattered site. So it's not meant to be fully just through accruals.
In the back.
Is the FMR inclusive of utilities? And is that amount offset by the 30% to collect from it?
The rental amount is meant to be inclusive of utilities, and the 30% is separate. So the 30% that you're expected to collect from your tenant is separate.
That 30% can go into service dollars?
No, the 30% is meant to supplement the rent.
So
It offsets.
it's get offset against that.
Yeah, so if your rent's $100, right, the subsidy is meant to pay $70, the client's meant to pay $30, or 30% of their income, right? So whatever 30% of their income is. And then utilities are meant to be funded out of that 70% that is being funded through the rental subsidy. But I will say the unit bonus that we have rolled out for nonprofit providers could also be considered as a source of revenue to help fund utilities
That's on the scattered site.
on the scatter site side.
And Gail mentioned incentives for landlords?
What I just said, it's not incentive, it's a unit incentive. So it's an incentive to nonprofits to secure units from landlords.
Yes, back there.
So for New York
So the question was, the process under New York 3 to move people from scatter site into congregate is very hard and complicated, convoluted, and is that going to be addressed in 1515? So this was actually another recommendation as part of the task force, the supportive housing task force, right? So the task force was it was real recommendations from providers who are dealing with these very same issues. And what came out of that is the desire on the city side and the recognition that we want to build in as much flexibility as possible, even when family sizes change, right? So we recognize that you might have a single who's living in a scatter site apartment that's a studio, and suddenly they now have, 3 kids and a wife, or, whatever the situation is. And so the good news is that because this is a city-funded program, there is more flexibility to allow for those types of changes. One of the biggest barriers is when you have a project that has federal funding in it, you cannot use that funding to move somebody into another unit because they're no longer considered homeless, right? So they're no longer eligible. We do have some of that flexibility, so we've been talking about developing a process on how to facilitate these types of referrals, and as long as they're moving, I think, as long as there's no federal dollars in it, we're trying to figure out ways to move people from city-funded to city-funded, and that would allow for that type of flexibility.
Okay, there was another question up front.
Yes, in regard to services, is there a minimum amount of services that an agency needs to offer the clients, whether it is congregate or scattered? And depending on the setting, congregate or scattered, are there going to be specific services that that provider must offer?
Yes, so
I'm going to repeat the question, and then we'll let Gail take it. Is there a minimum amount of services that a provider has to provide either in scatter site or congregate?
yes, so it's expected that the provider is going to meet with the tenants at least once a month, and that is going to happen in a congregate setting, on-site, in the tenant's apartment, also in a scattered setting in the tenant's apartment. It's expected that the provider is going to have an individualized service plan that is set up by the tenant and signed by the tenant quarterly in 1515, that everything in that service plan is going to be discussed with the tenant, and that the provider is going to be helping them gain the resources, navigate the systems, escort them to wherever it needs to be to help them achieve those goals.
Did you have another question?
Yes, as far as the incentive to providers for units that they place homeless individuals in, would that be the case if a provider partnered with a developer and, I guess, secured, say, 50 units? Would they get an incentive for that?
It's meant to apply to the scatter site program. So the question is, the unit incentive, if a provider was to partner with a developer to secure 50 units, would the unit incentive apply? And the answer is it really depends if those 50 units are part of the scatter site RFP program, and those 50 units aren't concentrated all in one building, right? Because if all 50 units are in one building, then it's a congregate program. So if it's scattered and it's 50 units scattered across the city, then yes.
Do we have more questions in the audience? Have you learned everything you ever wanted to know about NYC 1515? We have one more question.
How can we find out about where you're meeting on the 19th for the info session?
Where's the meeting on the 19th?
Thank you for raising that, because I was just about to plug it again. It's going to be at 4 World Trade Center on the 37th floor, and the network is actually going to be sending the information out. So if all of you are part of their email list, you should be getting it from them. You can also just give us your information. We'll make sure that you get it. And that's another opportunity to really dig into some more details.
And you will have representatives from all 3 agencies at that info session, so if you have questions for any of us, someone will be there.
Yes.
Are the complete recommendations of the task force available online? On which site?
Are the task force recommendations available online?
So this is the report. And they are on our website. So if you go to www.nyc.gov/HRA, and then you look on the side and you look for supportive housing, you'll see a link to the full report. You can download it. It's there. You'll see all 23 recommendations. And, we hope you enjoy.
Okay, well, if there aren't any further questions, I want you all to join me in giving a round of applause to our panelists. And thank you all for spending your early afternoon with us. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.